my favorite thing is Bernie Sanders and AOC. So Bernie Sanders is now campaigning with AOC. With Bernie Sanders saying that Michael Bloomberg, right? Michael Bloomberg declared last week. Michael Bloomberg is very bad, by the way, according to the left, because he's a billionaire. And we know billionaires are very bad. The New York Times is saying this today also. The New York Times has an entire piece today from Michael Tomasky, I'll get to in a second, talking about how billionaires are the worst among us. I don't know when they transformed into being the worst, right? They were okay before, like they're the same person when they were making 50 grand living in the garage and putting together the business. Now they're just real rich. But apparently I've always been looking for this from the left. Where's the dollar threshold where you cross over from being a person who's striving to make it to being an evil, wealthy person? Where is that dollar threshold? Is it like when you make more than $100,000 a year and you get to $100,001 and then boom, Satan grabs you and suddenly you are inhabited by the spirit of the demon and suddenly you just hate everyone, you want to fire everyone, you're a rapacious capitalist who pollutes the rivers. You know, you keep saying, why are you defending billionaires? What do you have in it? Why are you defending billionaires? The reason I'm defending billionaires is because the reason that a lot of billionaires are billionaires, not people who inherited wealth. The vast majority of people who are billionaires are people who are billionaires because they created businesses and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of jobs. The Bernie Sanders attack on billionaires and the Elizabeth Warren attack on billionaires is cynical and disgusting. It really is disgusting. It is. I'm sorry. Elizabeth Warren is worth $12 million. And there she's like, these rich people, they must be stopped. And then you got Bernie Sanders, who's basically a giant welfare queen living off the government for the last 50 years of his life. And he's like, oh, well, we can't let any of these people who actually earn the wealth run anything. They shouldn't run for office. Only I should. I've been useless my entire life. So useless, I was kicked off a commune. So you got Bernie ripping into billionaires. And then you got Michael Tomasky over at New York Times saying, Bill Gates, I implore you to connect some dots. He says, the billionaire class has begun unloading on Elizabeth Warren. You see, it's a class now. It's a class. Now, just to recognize a fact, Bill Gates is basically a lifelong Democrat. Warren Buffett is a lifelong Democrat. Okay, a lot of these quote-unquote billionaire class members are lifelong Democrats, people who have given tons of money to left-leaning causes, but they're a class now. You see? This is pure Marxist speak, where you are judged by the basis of your income, by the basis of your wealth, not by what you think or what you do or how you vote or any of that sort of stuff. Like George Soros is a billionaire. George Soros gives a lot of money to exactly the kinds of people that Jamie Dimon doesn't like. So treating everybody as a class based on their income is really stupid. In any case, this dumb columnist for the New York Times says, the billionaire class has begun unloading on Elizabeth Warren. I'm not expert enough to judge the wisdom of Senator Warren's proposed wealth tax. Well, then what are you writing about? Like, this entire thing is about her wealth tax. Is I know there are questions about its constitutionality and that several European nations tried a similar approach and found it unworkable, though 4 countries still have it. I don't get why the candidates aren't simply proposing to increase marginal income tax rates on dollars earned above some very high figure. That seems a lot more straightforward to me. The reason, God, the stunning ignorance of New York Times columnists. The reason, not to justify Elizabeth Warren, the reason she's proposing a wealth tax is there isn't enough money at the upper end of the income bracket in terms of income earned every year to pay for her proposals. The wealth tax is a confiscatory, nasty tax designed to pay for her garbage proposals that amount to $52 trillion in spending over the next 10 years. That's why she's going for the wealth tax. Hey, you can increase the marginal tax rate. It ain't going to pay for this stuff. It isn't. But this guy says, this column is not a brief for Miss Warren's wealth tax or for her candidacy. I don't have a preferred candidate. Instead, I want to make a simple plea to the country's billionaires. Multi-billion-dollar fortunes are often called excessive and decadent. But here's something they're rarely called but ought to be: anti-democratic. These fortunes will destroy our democracy. So let me get this straight. You earn $1 billion because you have a bunch of consensual economic transactions with people, and that's anti-democratic. What is democratic is for the government to come and seize the results of those voluntary transactions. Jeff Bezos has not seized wealth from anyone. You want the government to do that. Who's more anti-democratic? Okay, Bill Gates has not seized wealth from anyone. In fact, he's provided jobs to hundreds of thousands of people and indirectly to probably millions of people. You want to seize the wealth he has earned on the basis of those voluntary economic transactions. Who's more anti-democratic, you or Bill Gates? This guy says, why is it anti-democratic? Why would it matter to our democracy whether Jeff Bezos is worth $113 billion or $13 billion? Because any democracy needs a robust and thriving middle class, and we have spent the last 30 years or so transferring trillions of dollars from the middle class to the people at the very top. And then he just quotes the favorite Elizabeth Warren economist, Gabriel Zucman. The 400 richest Americans now own more of the country's riches than 150 million adults in the bottom 60% of the wealth distribution. The 400's share has tripled since the 1980s. Well, what happened to the people at the bottom? Are they all getting poorer? No, it turns out that the middle class is getting richer too. By statistics, the middle class has largely become upper middle class. This notion that it's only people at the top who are living better, I love the sort of hazy sepia-toned vision of the 1950s where every man was a king and every man was wealthy. Well, first of all, you're leaving out a lot of black folks, okay? So if you're going to start with the 1950s and the economy of the 1950s, you should recognize there was a permanent underclass created by segregation in the South. And then look at the lives of people in the 1950s. It's so funny to hear all of these people who are professors at Berkeley talk about how wonderful jobs were in the 1950s. Really? Would you like to go and rivet for 12 hours a day? Is that your idea of a good time? When we talk about these office jobs, oh, you're in an air-conditioned office and, you might get sciatica from that chair. You might get sciatica from it. We have a 3.6% unemployment rate in this country, by the way, which is the lowest it has been. It's a full employment economy. We have more job openings than people who are seeking the jobs at this point. Okay? But your idea is that in the 1950s, you had a union job and you used to go into the Ford factory and rivet all day. That sound like a great job to you? Yeah, it's because you never done any riveting. It's a really rough job. It's a really, really hard job. It is a back-breaking job. And yet the idea is that the 50s were somehow better than they are now, than we are now economically. Really, then why does everybody have an air conditioner? Why does everybody have a TV? Why does everybody have a car? Why does everybody have a microwave? I'm talking about people under the poverty line. Okay, it's just a perverse view of how the American economy works. But the idea is that people in the middle class are repulsed by great wealth. Wealth has shifted to the top. It has been taken away from the middle class. There is no evidence this is true. There is zero evidence that the wealth coming at the top is coming from the middle class, because that is not how economics works. Do you believe that how did the rich people get the wealth from the middle class? Explain it. Really, explain how that transition happened. Did they go to middle class families, put a gun in their face and say, turn over those bucks? Is that what Bill Gates did? Or did he offer a product a lot of middle class people bought and then used to make their lives better? How many of the people, this dolt, I'm sure that he wrote this thing on some version of Microsoft Word. And so all of this is just a rip on billionaires. But the fact is, billionaires are billionaires because they created voluntary economic transactions. They did. And when you rip on quote-unquote big companies in the United States, recognize that you are ripping on the companies that provide a plurality of employment in the United States. Since 2014, the latest year for which there is census data, according to, again, the CPAs of New York, this is no longer the case. At this point, 39.2% of Americans are employed at either a large or a very large company, while 26.5% worked at mid-sized companies, and 34.3% worked at small companies. So that means consolidation, big companies, they're hiring you. And you know who tends to own rich companies or big portions of big companies? Billionaires. You know why? Because the company's successful. The vilification of wealth in this country is insane, counterproductive, and stupid. And by the way, it's a violation of the 10th commandment. If you're just going to go on a moral level, it's a violation of the 10th commandment that you shouldn't covet your neighbor's property. For you to suggest that Bill Gates' wealth must be taken away from him on the basis that you don't like Bill Gates being wealthy. That's you being a bad person. It is. I'm sorry. If it's about your jealousy level, it's you. And I hear from people on the left, well, if you could just take $1 billion away from Bill Gates and heal homelessness, wouldn't you do it? First of all, you're assuming two things. One, that if a homeless person breaks into Bill Gates' house and steals $1 billion, that somehow that's morally acceptable, which it is not. Two, that you can solve the homelessness problem by throwing money at it, which I think that Los Angeles, New York, and San Francisco have proved how stupid that idea is. In any case, there's this weird idea that billionaires don't actually create jobs. They're just taking that money and sucking it away. There's only one problem. First of all, how you define billionaire is basically, in many cases, like Jeff Bezos, he doesn't have $100 billion in cash. He has stock in Amazon. And as he provides goods and services to people, that stock rises or falls. That's why you'll see headlines like, Mark Zuckerberg lost $1 billion in a day. No, he didn't. He didn't lose any money that day. His stock prices went down. If he sold that day, he'd lose the money. He didn't lose any money because he didn't sell the stock. Okay, same thing with Jeff Bezos. So just understand that when you're talking about somebody's wealth, you're talking about not just cash assets. The idea that billionaires have not created jobs, that somehow they're the ones who are a problem, that Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, who have not created, so far as I'm aware, a single job in the history of their employment. Not one. Right? Bernie Sanders' jobs have all been created by staff or by campaigns. Hey, Elizabeth Warren, she had some aides paid for by Harvard Law School, maybe some teachers' assistants. That's pretty much it. But they know how to create jobs. They are the great job creators. You know, it's so funny. Elizabeth Warren was one of the leaders in the "you didn't build that" routine. And she was the one who came up with that. She and Deval Patrick, I think in Massachusetts. I think she was the first one to use it, and then Obama hijacked it. That you didn't build that. If you built something, it was created by the people who created roads. Yes, because it was the road that made Amazon happen. Yes, it is obvious that using public resources is one aspect of living in a large republic. It is also true that you know what didn't create Amazon? The road. Okay, that would be necessary but not sufficient. You're missing a large element called Amazon in that particular. Like, it's so funny to me. People from the government telling you didn't build that. You know who really didn't build that? The members of the government. They didn't. They provided you with a necessary piece that, in all likelihood, you probably could have come up with in coordination with others. Would have been more expensive in many cases, but the proper response to you didn't build that is, no, you didn't build that. You didn't. Elizabeth Warren has built nothing. Nothing, so far as I'm aware. Bernie Sanders has built 0 things, ever. And yet we're being told, you didn't build that? Who? Who is you? Because if this is a comparative thing, if you want to say, like, let's try and ballpark this thing. If you're saying that it's roads and firefighters and police, and because those things exist, you can have a company in the United States, and so you didn't build that, let's try to ballpark the percentage responsibility for building a business. Yeah, you're right. Without the road, without the police, without the firefighters, it'd be difficult to build business. Absolutely correct. You know what percentage of building a business that represents? I don't know. What do you think? 2%? 3%? It sure ain't 60. Not 100. A rule of law is necessary, but not sufficient. People have to create businesses off the top of that. And so the idea that you're going to be paying exorbitant levels of money to the government for roads, it's not going for roads. We know it's not going for roads. So stop pretending. Even if you want to make the case, you didn't build that, and it was the roads, and it was the police and the firefighters, fine. You know what that would represent in terms of the tax rate? Like nothing, like close to 0 to pay for those things that supposedly contributed to you building the business. I'll tell you what didn't build the business. Welfare dollars, typically. Social Security didn't build the business. Medicare, Medicaid didn't build the business. Now, you want to make the case for those things? Go ahead and make that case. But don't make the case that you owe the money for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid because, quote unquote, you didn't build that. That's absolute. It's a complete non sequitur. The two things have nothing to do with one another. Okay, in any case, how many jobs are, quote unquote, billionaires in the United States creating? According to Karen Blankfeld over at Forbes.com, the top 12 billionaires in America as of October 2016 had created a minimum of 2.3 million jobs. That's a lot of jobs, guys. A lot of jobs, 2.3 million. And that is just direct jobs, people who directly work for their companies. Now, if you know anything about economics, you also understand that they've created a lot more indirect jobs. So, for example, Bernie Marcus and Arthur Blank were fired from their jobs at a hardware store in 1978, and then they opened Home Depot. Today, Home Depot has more than 385,000 workers in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. But let's be real about this. Home Depot provides a lot more jobs than that indirectly because they provide all sorts of great products at great prices. How many plumbers and handymen and contractors and construction workers and real estate moguls have made their fortune based on the fact that they get to use materials that are brought to them by those 385,000 workers at Home Depot? The economy is interconnected. You hear the same complaint about like Mark Zuckerberg over at Facebook or Google because there are only about 15,000 jobs at Facebook or 40,000 jobs at Google, right? But how many businesses are reliant on Facebook or Google in order to do their business? The entire media is reliant on Google. That's tens of thousands of jobs. Many practical businesses are reliant on Facebook to get out the word about their businesses. These are value-added propositions. So why are you angry at value-added propositions? And then you're angry, again, you're going to have to explain to me how Mark Zuckerberg seized his wealth from the middle class. You're going to have to explain to me how Jeff Bezos, who has made your life better in practically every way, because now we live in a magical world where you can hit a button and something arrives at your door in like 2 days from anywhere on earth. That's insane. And then you're telling me he's the bad guy here, not Elizabeth Warren, who wants to confiscate his wealth, and yours, by the way? That Bernie Sanders isn't the bad guy? A lifelong leech who's accomplished nothing? He's not the bad guy? That Jeff Bezos is the bad guy? Yeah, spare me. Spare me.